Hey guys, tonight we're kicking things off with something a little darker. Think plagues, punishments, and, well, just plain awful food. We're going to take a deep dive into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget those sanitized castle and chivalry fantasies Hollywood's been selling you. The brutal reality? You probably wouldn't survive a single day. So, before you get too comfy, take a sec to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely dig what I'm doing here. And drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always find it wild to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Okay, now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for a little white noise, and let's ease our way into tonight's little adventure. Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is basically a half-rotted straw mattress crawling with bugs and hay that reeks like a barn floor, and that's because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. No memory foam, no fluffy pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs about as much as a small cow from all the accumulated gunk. You blink awake as the church bell clangs somewhere far off. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only way louder and somehow even less forgiving. Your home is a one-room wooden hut with absolutely no windows, featuring a charming open-concept floor plan where your entire family, your livestock, and all the local insects are living together in perfect harmony. The smell? Oh, it's a regular olfactory symphony. A delicate blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you're desperately hoping isn't mold. But deep down you know it probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented yet. And even if they had been, they just melt on your dirt floor. Hell is very real. Really, really real. Priests will describe it for you in all sorts of gruesome detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and just eternal wailing. If the plague isn't enough to scare you straight, then eternal damnation definitely will. You can't even read the Bible for yourself because it's all written in Latin, which is a language that's exclusively for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who thinks he's too good for everyone else. You have to rely on the church to interpret absolutely everything for you, which basically means that if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, guess it's time to kneel harder and pray some more. Tithes, which is 1/10 of everything that you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have absolutely nothing, congratulations, you're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays are holy days, and there are dozens upon dozens of them. While they do offer you some breaks from working, they're definitely not for having fun. Therefore, you must attend Mass, fast, confess your sins, and remind yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Questioning the church is super dangerous. Heretics are burned at the stake. Witches are drowned. Blasphemers are flogged. And skeptics are quickly reformed. So you just go through all the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest even likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, just try doing it as a woman. All the filth, the famine, the fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing a video game on hard mode with no health potions and absolutely no restart button. Here's the translated and rewritten version of the provided text, adhering to your specific instructions. Taxes and land reform for the common people were also part of his message. Pugachev's words ignited a firestorm across the Volga River region, resonating deeply with Ksakh's peasants and old believers. At a time marked by a brutally widening gap between the privileged nobles and the oppressed serfs, his promises sounded like a path to salvation, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The Pugachev rebellion subsequently swelled into the largest peasant uprising in the entirety of Russian history, a testament to the people's desperation. Towns fell one after another, fortresses were captured with surprising ease, and nobles, seen as symbols of oppression, were slaughtered without mercy. For a terrifying moment, it truly seemed as if the very foundations of the Russian Empire might fracture and crumble, threatening Catherine's grip on power. Catherine, a ruler known for her composure, was genuinely shaken by the scale of the unrest. This wasn't a typical foreign war that could be neatly resolved with cavalry charges and diplomatic treaties. This was a revolt brewing from within, a direct challenge to the very system that she, as empress, embodied. However, Catherine didn't succumb to panic. Instead, she took decisive action, demonstrating the strength and resolve that defined her reign. She dispatched professional military forces, seasoned and disciplined, with clear orders to crush the rebellion without hesitation or remorse. The result was swift and brutal. By 1774, Pugachev's forces, outmatched and outmaneuvered, suffered a decisive defeat. Pugachev himself was captured. He was then paraded through the streets in an iron cage, a spectacle designed to intimidate the populace. Ultimately, he was beheaded in Moscow in a public execution, a grim warning to anyone who dared to follow in his footsteps and challenge the established order. Surrounding the Red Queen's crimson-drenched remains was a world of profound silence, broken only by the subtle gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian, the precious materials that accompanied her on her final journey. These weren't mere ornaments or decorative trinkets. They were carefully chosen offerings, each one imbued with symbolic meaning and intended to accompany her on her treacherous journey to the Maya afterlife, the Xibalba, the shadowy underworld ruled by the gods of death. At her sides were jade necklaces, heavy and cold to the touch, their polished surfaces still radiant after more than 1,300 years spent underground, a testament to the enduring beauty and value of the stone. Jade was more than just a beautiful gemstone. It was a sacred substance, highly prized by the Maya and considered a potent symbol of eternal life, representing the green of the maize, the life-giving staple crop, the vitality of the lush jungle, and the breath of the gods, the very essence of existence. Only the elite members of Maya society, those who held positions of power and influence, were typically buried with jade, a clear sign of their elevated status. For the Red Queen, jade covered her chest, wrists, and ears, a clear indication that in life she had wielded significant influence, perhaps even divine favor, granting her a privileged status in the eyes of the gods. One of the most haunting and captivating objects found within the tomb was the jade funerary mask, a delicate and intricately crafted artifact that had been placed reverentially over her face, concealing her features and transforming her into a divine being. Unlike the golden death masks of ancient Egypt, which were solid and imposing, this mask was remarkably subtle, constructed from dozens of tiny mosaic tiles meticulously arranged to mimic the contours of her skull, capturing her likeness and preserving her identity for eternity. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the lively neighborhood of Coyoacán, at that time a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul or Blue House, was a place filled with vibrant colors, contradictions, and an underlying sense of strength. It would later become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum dedicated to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic woman of indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were polar opposites. Guillermo was reserved and intellectual. Matilda was deeply religious and emotionally distant. Frida would inherit her father's introspective nature and artistic eye, but also her mother's unwavering resilience. As a child, Frida was known for being imaginative, outspoken, and daring. She was a voracious reader and asked questions that most adults preferred to avoid. However, at the age of 6, she contracted polio, which resulted in her right leg being thinner and weaker than her left. She attempted to conceal this physical difference with long skirts but never allowed it to restrict her spirit. The illness confined her to bed for several months, isolating her from other children. During this time, she grew closer to her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and keep her mind engaged. Unlike most girls of her era, Frida didn't dream of becoming a wife or homemaker. Her ambition was to become a doctor, so at the age of 15, she enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of only a small number of girls accepted. There, She stood out not only for her intelligence, but also for her rebellious wit, radical ideas, and distinctive sense of style. She joined a group of young intellectuals known as the Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. You try to stretch, but instantly regret it because the air is frigid and your joints are screaming. You're 22 years old, which, in medieval terms, is practically middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an ancient wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by some confused farmer. Just getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either slick with last night's rain, which is dripping through the leaky thatched roof, or it's crusty with something your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the local ecosystem. Oh, and privacy? What's that? Your entire family, and maybe a random cousin who never actually left, are all waking up right next to you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no personal space, just communal everything. Welcome to a typical morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and like 8 other people are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here, believe me. So, you've somehow managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now nature's calling. And it's not calling politely, screaming at you. This is the point where you really start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a slightly annoyed plunger standing by in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a minor public spectacle. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is probably just a wooden bucket out behind the house, which is already overflowing because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating some questionable turnips. The smell is epic, biblical even. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here's the best part, you toss it out into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to yell something like "Gare-de-lou" before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for "watch out below." From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, and die tired. Education? Not likely at all. Unless you're from a noble family and you get sent off to a convent, your intellectual development pretty much stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch up a tunic. Marriage happens super early. I mean really early. It's not even considered weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's definitely not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion is not even required. Once you're married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and try not to complain. Because complaining might get you branded as a nag, or even worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on the local fashion. Childbirth is basically a death lottery. There's absolutely no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do the best they can, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both of them. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many others don't survive, though. But don't worry, once the baby is out, your workload just increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help out in the fields. You never get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're considered suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is super limited. Nuns lived under super strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth was always ranked below men. In the aftermath of the rebellion, Catherine doubled down on measures to ensure order and maintain strict control over the empire. Her earlier dreams of gradually liberating the serfs quietly faded into silence, replaced by a pragmatic understanding of the political realities she faced. The rebellion had starkly revealed the limits of Enlightenment ideals in a country still deeply entrenched in feudalism, where the power of the nobility was paramount. She now leaned even more heavily on the nobility, solidifying their support by granting them even more absolute control over their serfs. This marked a significant turning point in her reign. The empress who once liberally quoted Voltaire, a champion of Enlightenment thinking, now prioritized stability and the preservation of power over abstract philosophical ideals. Reform became a much more cautious and measured process, implemented with a keen awareness of its potential consequences. Surveillance increased across the empire, with agents watching for any signs of dissent. Even whispered rebellion was to be swiftly and decisively stomped out before it could gain traction and take hold. Pugachev may have ultimately lost his head, but he left behind a chilling warning that haunted Catherine for the remainder of her reign. Power built on inequality is inherently unstable and can only endure for so long before a storm of resentment comes crashing through the foundations. By the time Catherine the Great approached the final years of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, an unprecedented tenure that surpassed that of any other female ruler in Russian history. From the very moment she seized power in a daring coup, she had defied expectations, boldly reshaped her empire according to her vision, and fundamentally redefined what a woman and a monarch could achieve. Under Catherine's reign, Russia transformed into a true European powerhouse, a force to be reckoned with on the international stage. The mask served a crucial ritual function, intended to protect her soul, to preserve her individual identity, and to present her as a divine figure in the eyes of the gods, ensuring her safe passage through the underworld. Scattered near her bones were various bone needles, sharp obsidian blades, and delicate shell artifacts, their purpose less clear but equally intriguing. These could have been tools used in ritual practices, or perhaps they were symbolic representations of her status as a priestess, a healer, or a royal matriarch, roles that she may have held during her lifetime. One bone pin, in particular, was engraved with intricate designs, faint but purposeful, a small echo of her voice lost to the relentless passage of time. At her feet and along the edges of the tomb were several ceramic vessels, still sealed after all these centuries, likely once filled with a variety of offerings. These may have contained food, nourishing drinks, or fragrant incense, all intended to sustain her spirit and provide comfort on her journey beyond death. The Maya believed that the afterlife was not a static place, but rather a long and arduous journey, dangerous and layered, filled with challenges and tests. These items weren't simply luxuries or tokens of affection. They were considered essential necessities, providing the Red Queen with the means to navigate the perils of the underworld and reach her final destination. To the modern observer, the tomb feels remarkably intimate, not excessively overloaded with treasures, but rather intentionally curated, with each item carefully chosen for its spiritual weight and symbolic significance. There was no glittering gold, no elaborate chariots, no ostentatious displays of pomp and circumstance. Instead, there were items selected with deep spiritual consideration, objects that held profound meaning within the context of Maya beliefs about death and the afterlife. Frida was drawn to revolution, to ideas that challenged established traditions. But even in those early years, before the devastating bus accident that would forever impact her body, and before the fame that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already making her mark on the world with her sharp intellect, uncompromising beliefs, and a unique identity that defied expectations. She wasn't simply growing up in Coyoacan. She was preparing to completely reinvent herself. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was irrevocably divided. There was the girl she once was and the woman she was forced to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing each other, and likely engaging in one of their frequent arguments. Frida never approached anything passively, but in a matter of moments, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in an instant, her future shattered into a whirlwind of pain, twisted metal, and haunting silence. The crash was catastrophic. The streetcar slammed the bus against a wall, splintering the wood and ejecting passengers violently. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail, which entered her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places. Her right leg was shattered. Her foot was dislocated. Her collarbone and ribs were broken. Her shoulder was dislocated. Her abdomen was pierced. She was only 18 years old. A man covered her with a borrowed overcoat. Someone else noticed that her body was shimmering, not from blood, but from the gold powder she had been carrying in a pouch. The impact had caused it to explode, covering her broken body in what resembled glittering ash. Frida was transported to the Red Cross Hospital, where she underwent numerous surgeries over the following months. She spent weeks in a body cast, lying flat on her back, completely immobile, tormented by infection and uncertainty. Although, honestly, nobody ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are basically open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd really rather not examine too closely. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, well, congratulations. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers in an outhouse where privacy is just a rumor and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make a little small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or, if they're feeling particularly fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't exactly all the rage back then. And if you're living in a castle, things must be better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, which is basically a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea, except that your enemies know about this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waist chute. Talk about a backdoor entry. So, whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a seriously humiliating ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's always disgusting. One little slip on a wet stone path and you're face first in humanity's leftovers. And you still haven't brushed your teeth yet, but we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet situation. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast? Something warm, delicious, and comforting? Sorry, folks, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is a pretty grim affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering to life, and absolutely no avocado toast. You sit down, or more likely squat, near the fire with a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to just endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, and ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully. So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly even a goat. But just when you think your day can't possibly get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear here, the Middle Ages were definitely not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly just meant hoping that the local lord wasn't in a bad mood. Violence is absolutely everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes even in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more like performance art than any kind of protection. Steal a loaf of bread and you could lose a hand. Accused of lying? Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much? You'll meet the scold's bridle, which is a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar shoved in your mouth, of course for correction. Let's just say you're accused of something really serious like heresy or theft or witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. In one version, you stick your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, then you're definitely guilty. Another option is that you're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent but probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. It's kind of like a medieval game show where the prize is survival and the host is actively rooting against you. If you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people will even bring snacks. Its territory expanded by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing up Crimea, significant portions of Poland, and strategic stretches of the Black Sea coast. These weren't simply random military victories or territorial acquisitions. They were carefully planned strategic pivots, meticulously executed to secure vital warm water ports and reshape trade routes, thereby bolstering Russia's economic strength and influence. But her legacy wasn't solely etched onto maps through territorial expansion. Catherine also left an indelible cultural mark on Russia, transforming it into a center of art and intellectual ferment. She played a pivotal role in founding the Hermitage Museum, now one of the world's most renowned art institutions, and amassed one of the greatest art collections in all of Europe, showcasing her refined taste and appreciation for the arts. She also actively corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment, fostering intellectual exchange and promoting progressive ideas. Her court became a vibrant center of sophistication, attracting artists, intellectuals, and diplomats from across Europe, and fostering an atmosphere of intellectual ambition and artistic creativity. In a country often viewed as backward and unsophisticated by Western Europeans, Catherine forcefully placed Russia firmly on the cultural map, challenging prevailing stereotypes and demonstrating Russia's potential for cultural achievement. She also modernized education, establishing schools for girls, a groundbreaking initiative for the time, and actively promoted the printing and dissemination of books, making knowledge more accessible to a wider segment of the population. Furthermore, she bravely introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, personally receiving the vaccine herself in a public display of scientific endorsement, an act of considerable bravery and leadership in an era when medical practices were often viewed with skepticism and fear. It was, in essence, a map for the soul, a guide to help her navigate the complexities of the underworld. Through these carefully selected treasures, we catch a fleeting glimpse into how the ancient Maya understood death, not as a finality or an end, but as a crucial transition, a gateway to a new and transformed existence. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten, lost to the ravages of time. She was being meticulously prepared to ascend to a higher plane of existence, to join the ranks of the gods and become a part of the sacred order of the cosmos. For all the grandeur and artistry of her tomb, the Red Queen left behind one haunting void, one persistent question mark that has captivated archaeologists and historians for decades. No name, no inscriptions adorned her sarcophagus, no glyphs on the walls identified her or revealed her identity. She was clearly someone powerful, a woman of immense importance in Palenque society. But who exactly was she? From the very moment her tomb was opened and its treasures revealed, scholars began trying to connect the dots, piecing together fragments of evidence in an attempt to solve the mystery of her identity. The most compelling and widely accepted theory suggests that the Red Queen was, in fact, Sakkuk, the wife of Kinich Jenab Pakel, known today as Pakel the Great, the most famous and influential ruler of Palenque. Sakkuk was more than just Pakel's consort or queen. She was born into a noble family, possessing a high status in her own right, and married into Palenque's royal dynasty at a young age, solidifying her position within the ruling elite. She bore Pakel at least 3 sons, all of whom held high positions within the kingdom, further cementing her influence and power. She also played a key ceremonial role during her husband's long and prosperous reign, participating in important rituals and solidifying her connection to the divine realm. The future she had envisioned for herself as a doctor receded further with each passing day. However, in that stillness, something new began to emerge. Her father provided her with brushes. Her mother rigged up a special easel to hang above her bed. A mirror was positioned on the canopy so she could see herself. And there, confined in plaster and agony, Frida began to paint. Initially, it was out of boredom, but it soon evolved into an obsession. Her first subjects were her own reflections because that was all she had. But what emerged wasn't mere vanity. It was a means of survival. The crash had broken her physically, but it had also unlocked a door into her own mind, her own body, and eventually into the surreal language of pain and identity that would come to define her art. The young woman who had aspired to heal others now began to heal herself, one brushstroke at a time. As Frida Kahlo lay encased in plaster and steel, her body waging a constant battle against itself with every breath, she turned to painting. What began as a form of therapy quickly transformed into a language. And that language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often difficult to confront, which was precisely the intention. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or idyllic landscapes. She painted pain. Her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her initial subjects were self-portraits, not out of narcissism, but because, as she famously declared, "I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small in scale, painted on tin or wood panels, drawing inspiration from Mexican retablos, devotional paintings intended to depict stories of suffering and miracles. Frida turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas. Her emotions became the altar. She depicted herself as fractured, pierced, and bleeding. In one painting, she is impaled by nails, like a modern-day martyr. Pottage is a thick, gloppy stew made of whatever random stuff people could find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're really lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes even weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped right on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, you get a hunk of bread so hard it could probably deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other equally creative ingredients because wheat is strictly a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it. You negotiate with it. What about something to drink? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is practically swimming with parasites and filth. So, you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. Nobody's thrilled about it, but at least it probably won't kill you instantly. Want some meat or cheese? Keep dreaming. That's reserved for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your local lord is feeling particularly generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a couple of times a year. As for fresh fruit, you'll only get that when it's in season and hasn't already been fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices unless you happen to be royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away under guard, so you just chew your gritty bread, gulp down your medieval beer, and try really hard not to think about the rat that might have been nibbling on your pottage overnight. Breakfast doesn't exactly energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to go work like your life depends on it because, well, it absolutely does. So, you've choked down your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence is completely normal. Husbands were allowed, and even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights were commonplace. You could even be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war was always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone was always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, or God, or just pure boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might just bash your head in over a pig. So, walk very carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone who is carrying a club. At this point, you've somehow made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and pretty unglamorous death. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's just break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged way down by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before even reaching the age of 5. Disease, malnutrition, or just one bad winter was all it really took. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, absolutely no hope. If you managed to survive your childhood, you entered adulthood already completely exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by the time you were 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet, which was childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. Yet, her reign was also marked by inherent contradictions, a complex interplay of progressive ideals and pragmatic political considerations. While she genuinely admired the ideals of the Enlightenment, She never took decisive action to free the serfs, a glaring inconsistency that tarnished her image as an enlightened ruler. In fact, she paradoxically extended serfdom deeper into Russia's newly acquired territories, further entrenching the system of forced labor and inequality. Her reforms, while undeniably impressive in their scope and ambition, remained largely top-down in their implementation, carefully designed to polish the empire and enhance its image without fundamentally transforming its social and political foundations. Still, despite these contradictions, Catherine's rule undeniably brought stability and a sense of boundless ambition to Russia, propelling it onto the path of becoming a major European power. She understood, perhaps better than any of her predecessors, that power was not simply an inherited birthright. It was something that had to be actively crafted, meticulously managed, and constantly defended against internal and external threats. She ruled not by divine right alone, but by a potent combination of force of will, shrewd political brilliance, and relentless strategic calculation. She was called by many names throughout her life: a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all else, she was undeniably effective in consolidating her power and achieving her ambitious goals for Russia. When she died in 1796, Russia was demonstrably wealthier, significantly larger, and far more formidable than it had been in centuries, a testament to her leadership and vision. She left behind a secure throne, an empire that had expanded dramatically, and a legend that would endure for centuries to come, shaping Russia's identity and destiny. Catherine didn't merely reign as empress. If anyone could be considered worthy of such an elaborate and reverent burial, it would undoubtedly be her, a woman of exceptional status and influence. Supporting this theory is the tomb's strategic location, situated just a few feet away from Pakel's own grand burial chamber within the Temple of the Inscriptions. This close proximity strongly suggests a deliberate pairing, a conscious effort to link the two figures together in death, representing husband and wife, rulers even in the afterlife. The arrangement suggests that their fates were intertwined, their legacies inseparable. And then there's the compelling evidence of the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palenque have been found with such intense and widespread cinnabar coverage: Pakel and the Red Queen. It seems highly unlikely that this was merely a coincidence. It points to a shared ritual practice, a symbolic connection that united the two figures in death. But here's where the mystery deepens and the evidence becomes less conclusive. DNA tests were conducted on both sets of remains in the hopes of definitively confirming a genetic connection between the two individuals, but the results were inconclusive. The woman's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pakel, meaning that she was not his mother. But that didn't necessarily rule out a spousal relationship. After all, marriage does not require shared blood or a genetic connection. Some have argued that she could have been Sakkuk, Pakel's powerful mother, who ruled Palenque as queen regent before he came of age, a figure of immense political importance. Others suggest that she may have been a high priestess, a sister, or perhaps a royal ancestor whose name has simply been lost to the erosion of history, her identity erased by the relentless passage of time. In another, she floats in a desolate landscape, tethered to a broken column, a visual metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and exposed, but never passive, always observing. Her pain wasn't sanitized or sugar-coated. She painted the stark reality of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even a touch of humor. Each piece was a reclamation of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world that often sought to define her. But Frida wasn't simply recounting her story. She was pioneering a new form of visual narrative, one that seamlessly blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and potent symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed within the context of color, culture, and myth. By the time she had recovered enough to walk again, albeit with considerable pain, Frida was no longer the young girl who had dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. She had transformed the most devastating event of her life into a wellspring of creativity. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She forced the world to confront it, And in doing so, she elevated suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, while still in recovery, still painting, and only 21 years old, Frida Kahlo encountered the man who would become the most profound and tumultuous relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior and already Mexico's most celebrated painter. Enormous in both stature and presence, Rivera was a towering figure in Mexican muralism, renowned for his expansive, politically charged frescoes that depicted the history and struggles of the Mexican people. Frida had seen his work before and admired it greatly, but now she sought his professional opinion on her own art. Not that it'll do you much good. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. Just one. It's a rough wool tunic or a linen shift that you've worn every single day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just, wear this until it either disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear is optional. If you're lucky, you might have a linen undertunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had absolutely no clue what a seam was actually supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner anywhere in sight. So, your clothes are stained, stiff, and they smell like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it wouldn't be easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or stream, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it out in the sun, which is only out for approximately 3 days a year. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you even own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and they offer about as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot, trudging through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, also known as sharp rocks and disease-ridden puddles. All of this means one very important thing: your skin hates you. You're constantly itching. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body. Everybody has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. Nobody escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and nobody will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from all the rubbing. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites. And if you happen to develop a rash, well, too bad. There was no pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, or a crusade gone completely sideways. Even just walking to the market could be incredibly risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could also come quietly from the plague, which turns cities into cemeteries almost overnight, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages. Or even just from bad luck, like eating some spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. And as for funerals, you were pretty lucky if you even got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease from spreading further. There was no embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole in the ground, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough space left in the churchyard. So yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all of its casual forms. You didn't retire. You just stopped showing up one day. And speaking of exits, let's move right on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So, how's your day been so far? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried out for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get the plague, and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to just a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages with the gallant swordsman, the noble ladies in towers, the heroic battles, and feasts in candlelit great halls. It's all just a myth polished up by fairy tales and fantasy books. She ruled with exceptional intellect, strategic foresight, and an unapologetic grip on the reins of history, leaving an enduring mark on the world. And in doing so, she transcended the limitations of her title and became something more than just an empress. She became a myth, an almost larger-than-life figure whose accomplishments continue to be debated and celebrated. For all her power, territorial expansion, and enduring legacy, Catherine the Great was still, at her core, a woman navigating a predominantly man's world and resolutely reshaping it in her own image. Behind the carefully crafted imperial portraits and the authoritative state decrees was a woman acutely aware of the precariousness of her position, constantly vigilant against those who sought to undermine her authority. She wasn't born Russian, a fact that her detractors often used against her. She ascended to the throne through a coup, a violent act of regime change that left many questioning her legitimacy. And she ruled over an empire deeply resistant to the idea of a woman in charge, particularly one who had seized power through such unconventional means. And yet, despite these formidable challenges, she not only endured but thrived, proving her doubters wrong and establishing herself as one of Russia's most influential rulers. Catherine was never content to be a mere figurehead or ornamental presence on the throne. She was an avid reader, voraciously consuming books on history, philosophy, and politics, and she wrote endlessly, expressing her thoughts and ideas in letters, memoirs, and even plays. She never stopped learning, constantly seeking to expand her knowledge and understanding of the world around her. Her daily schedule was notoriously demanding, filled with hours of poring over detailed reports, engaging in correspondence with foreign powers, meticulously editing state papers, and skillfully managing a court filled with rival factions vying for her attention and favor. Still, despite these alternative theories, the weight of the evidence points most strongly to Sakuk, a queen by title, a mother of kings, and a spiritual counterpart to Pakal, a figure who played a central role in the history of Palenque. The lack of a name or inscriptions may not have been an oversight or an accident. It may have been intentional, a deliberate choice on the part of those who buried her. In Maya cosmology, the soul lived on not necessarily through elaborate monuments or written records, but through ritual, through potent symbols, and through the whispered stories of the earth, passed down through generations. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and truth, a figure who embodies the mystery and power of the ancient Maya world. A woman who ruled, remembered not in stone or in glyphs, but in scarlet and silence, her legacy enduring through the ages. To truly understand the Red Queen and her place in the history of Palenque, we must understand the world she came from, a complex and fascinating society where Maya women, especially those of royal lineage, held far more influence and wielded more power than many historical accounts often acknowledge. In Maya civilization, politics was often a family affair, with power and influence passed down through generations and carefully managed within the royal families. Royal women weren't simply passive consorts or ornamental figures. They were often skilled diplomats, respected priestesses, and shrewd power brokers, actively involved in the political affairs of the kingdom. They conducted important rituals, sponsored the construction of temples and other public works, and played crucial roles in maintaining dynastic legitimacy, ensuring the continuity of the ruling line. Their bloodlines were considered valuable political capital, used to forge strategic alliances with other Maya cities and secure claims to the throne, solidifying their family's power and influence. She brought her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his work on a scaffold to ask him directly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look at her paintings and responded, "Yes, and I'm not just saying that to be kind." He recognized something rare in her work, an unfiltered voice, raw and unpretentious, brimming with rage, irony, pain, and undeniable beauty. They embarked on a relationship that was as all-consuming as it was creatively stimulating. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929. To outsiders, they appeared to be an unlikely pairing. Diego, massive, unfaithful, and politically influential. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already reliant on a cane. Her parents described their marriage as a union between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but volatile. Diego supported her art and encouraged her artistic development. However, he was also perpetually unfaithful, even engaging in an affair with Frida's own sister, Christina. Frida was heartbroken, and in retaliation, she took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939 but remarried a year later under different terms. This time, Frida would maintain her autonomy, her home, her money, and her name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative partnership and mutual understanding. Despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego remained a constant presence in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, but also believed in her as an artist, as a revolutionary, and as a woman who could redefine the boundaries of painting. Together, they were far from peaceful, but they were undeniably legendary. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone cream, no one to tell you that it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you're lucky enough to not get an infection, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months or so, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich. Imported at great cost, mostly used in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, you'll do it slowly over time with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was absolutely everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you had a much better chance of surviving. But you were still just one bad bowl of soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but you also had a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury, the simpler times weren't really simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Life was about survival, not leisure. And if you did manage to find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could really do with it. There was no upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google what this weird rash is. You just lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. But here's the wildest part of all. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are just stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they managed to make space for some light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe just say a quiet thank you to the modern world, and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so that you wouldn't have to. Long before she was known as Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, Mistress of Reform, and an icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Federica Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. She wasn't content to simply sit idly on the throne. She actively worked the throne, tirelessly shaping policy and exerting her influence like a seasoned stateswoman born to the role. She was also, in many ways, profoundly lonely, a burden often carried by those in positions of great power. She surrounded herself with a retinue of courtiers, lovers, and artists, but she wrote candidly in her memoirs of how few people she could truly trust, a reflection of the inherent isolation that comes with wielding absolute authority. Her son Paul, whom she deeply distrusted and deliberately kept away from matters of state, grew into a man she feared would undo all the progress she had made, a constant source of anxiety and uncertainty. Her greatest emotional partnership, with Grigory Potemkin, eventually faded into a deep and abiding friendship, but his untimely death in 1791 left a wound that never truly healed, a testament to the profound connection they shared. Catherine carefully crafted her public image, understanding the immense power of narrative and wielding it with a skill that surpassed that of most monarchs of her age. She skillfully presented herself as the mother of Russia, a benevolent and enlightened monarch, a fearless warrior, a cultivated empress, and a passionate lover of the arts, projecting an image of strength, intelligence, and sophistication. But beneath those carefully constructed roles was a woman who had endured profound rejection, bitter betrayal, scandalous rumors, and violent rebellion, all of which tested her resilience and resolve. And yet, she persevered, refusing to be defined by her challenges and emerging stronger each time. When she died in 1796, she left behind an empire fundamentally transformed, but also a legacy filled with lingering questions and unresolved issues. Could she have done more to end serfdom, dismantling a system that perpetuated inequality and injustice? Take Saxe-Cook, for example, the mother of Pakel the Great, a woman who exemplifies the power and influence that royal Maya women could wield. When the throne of Palenque was left vacant and the kingdom faced a period of uncertainty, she boldly took power herself and ruled as queen regent until her son, Pakel, came of age and was ready to assume the throne. She wasn't simply a placeholder or a temporary figurehead. She was a ruler in her own right, issuing decrees, overseeing important construction projects, and making decisions that shaped the destiny of Palenque. Without her strong leadership and political acumen, Pakel may never have risen to power at all, and Palenque may have faced a very different fate. And she wasn't an anomaly, an isolated example of female power. Across the Maya world, in places like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, archaeological evidence and surviving inscriptions show women performing major ceremonies, actively engaging in warfare diplomacy, and, in some cases, even ruling outright as queens. They were often portrayed in stele and murals, dressed in elaborate headdresses and regalia, standing beside kings as equals or, in some instances, even depicted as being above them in status, a testament to their power and influence. Their words were carved in glyphs. Their names were remembered and honored, at least for a time, until the inevitable forces of time and history began to erase them. By the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived centuries later, much of that complex history and the nuanced roles of Maya women had been eroded or misinterpreted. The colonial lens, often biased and culturally insensitive, tended to portray native women as silent and subservient figures in a male-dominated world, overlooking the rich and complex reality of their lives. In the 1930s, Frida Kahlo accompanied Diego Rivera on a journey north to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he fulfilled high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad exposed her to American industrialism, immense wealth, and the inherent contradictions of capitalism, leaving her deeply politically unsettled. Frida was a proud Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and an admirer of indigenous traditions. The opulence she witnessed in the United States, particularly while the Great Depression was devastating much of the country, only intensified her sense of disillusionment. In letters back home, she openly mocked the culture's materialism and obsession with appearances. She longed for the grit, color, and vibrant contradictions of Mexico. While Diego painted massive murals on factory walls, Frida began to create smaller, more intimate revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style became more defined, sharp, surreal, emotional, and profoundly personal. It was during this period that she produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't simply paint herself out of vanity. She painted herself as a means of survival. Her identity became her landscape. With her body constantly afflicted by pain from her accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits revealed her bleeding, fragmented, and exposed. Yet, her face remained calm, direct, and unapologetic. One of her most powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, depicts her lying on a hospital bed, weeping, surrounded by floating symbols of loss. A fetus, a snail, medical instruments, and a cracked pelvis. It was raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, a canvas that bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home during his exile, because without antibiotics, it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing, good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside. Because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't even remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. There's only sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen, if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise. You don't just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children, they start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake, and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered very little in terms of power. But Sophie herself, she had something that no title could ever provide. Razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was very strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating. Definitely not a warm, nurturing figure, but more of a social climber who was obsessed with status. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, was more distant than disciplinary. From a very young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to observe a room before speaking in it, skills that would soon become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth believed that a foreign bride, who would be pliable and grateful, would be much easier to control. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. She had noble blood. She was of the Lutheran faith, which she would be forced to abandon, and she had a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, had her own game in mind. In order to become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, which is Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions, she was burning the bridge behind her, stepping into a foreign empire with absolutely no way back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have ever predicted what would come next. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. Were her lofty Enlightenment ideals ultimately compromised by the harsh realities of politics and the need to maintain power? Was she, in the final analysis, more of a pragmatic ruler than a genuine reformer, prioritizing the stability of the empire over the pursuit of social justice? History remembers her by the title she never explicitly gave herself, Catherine the Great. It wasn't because she was flawless or universally kind or inherently just in all her decisions. It was because she seized power and wielded it on her own terms, in a time and place where women were not supposed to have any power at all. She didn't simply wear the crown as a symbol of inherited authority. She boldly rewrote what it meant to deserve one, redefining the very essence of leadership and leaving an enduring mark on the course of history. In the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, shrouded in mist and mystery, lie the ancient ruins of Palenque, a once great Maya city that now whispers fragmented stories from a long-vanished world. Towering temples, testaments to Maya architectural ingenuity, rise majestically above the dense jungle canopy, their once gleaming limestone facades now eroded by the relentless passage of time, yet still brimming with secrets waiting to be unearthed. And in 1994, after centuries of silence, one of those secrets chose to reveal itself, shedding new light on the lives and beliefs of the ancient Maya people. A dedicated team of Mexican archaeologists, meticulously led by the determined Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was conducting a thorough survey of Temple 13, a relatively modest pyramid nestled next to the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the elaborate burial site of the mighty King Pakal the Great, one of Palenque's most celebrated rulers. Temple 13 wasn't initially expected to hold any major discoveries, paling in comparison to its grander neighbor. But the archaeology, the physical evidence unearthed from the ruins of ancient cities, tells a very different story, one of complex gender roles where power was negotiated, not simply inherited, and where women played a far more active and influential role than previously believed. This historical context casts the Red Queen in a new and illuminating light, helping us to better understand her place within the social and political landscape of Palenque. She may not have ruled in name, but her burial, so rich, so sacred, and strategically positioned beside that of Pakal, suggests that she was a central pillar in the royal order, a figure of immense importance in the eyes of the Maya people. Her jade mask wasn't just a decorative ornament. It was a potent symbol of identity, of power held in life and protected in death, a visual representation of her status and influence. Her bloodline may have been the very glue that held Palenque's dynasty together, ensuring its continuity and legitimacy. In Maya civilization, a queen wasn't just a queen, a mere consort to the ruler. She was a keeper of sacred lineage, a vital voice in ceremonial practices, and often the essential bridge between the mortal world and the realm of the gods, a position of immense spiritual responsibility. The Red Queen may be nameless, her individual identity lost to the passage of time, but in her world, she was never voiceless, her actions and her legacy speaking volumes about the power and influence of Maya women in the ancient world. The Red Queen wasn't just buried with precious treasures and valuable artifacts. She was also buried within architecture rich with purpose, carefully layered with Maya cosmology, intricate ritual symbolism, and intentional design, all reflecting the profound beliefs and practices of her culture. Her tomb wasn't merely a grave, a final resting place for her mortal remains. Frida wore Tewana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not just as a fashion statement, but as a deliberate political and cultural declaration. Her art was inextricably linked to her beliefs. Her identity, her body, and her ideology were all intertwined in her work. While Rivera was painting grand murals of revolution, Frida painted its human cost. The body in pieces, the mind in turmoil, and the self always staring back. In exile and in illness, she became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer simply known as Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into something entirely different, A force, an artist whose work radiated with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and a strong sense of cultural identity. Back in her homeland, she fully embraced her true self. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a sanctuary of color and contradiction. With bright cobalt blue walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, and monkeys and parrots roaming freely, the house was a living embodiment of Frida's imagination, a blend of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earthiness. Here, she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-voto paintings, folk art, and revolutionary books. She wore bold Tehuana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted amidst the fragrant aroma of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi music from the streets outside. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her paintings became more intricate, more symbolic, and more overtly political. Works like The Two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrait of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her work in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper, great. You still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay? Basically survival. The perks? Occasional bleeding, break a bone, too bad. Get a fever? Drink some warm beer and keep going. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weather stripping. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. Your windows are covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth is nice in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is expensive, and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp. Your fingers are so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just called bad luck. Now, fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. But from the moment that Sophie stepped foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning on how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty. But from the very beginning, it felt much more like a cage than a crown. Peter, who was the heir to the Russian throne, was definitely not the dashing prince from the fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than he was in governing an empire or showing any kind of affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest that he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with a fierce determination. She learned the language, she studied its history, and she memorized all of the Orthodox rituals. She truly wanted to belong. Peter, on the other hand, just wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was also very political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was in decline. Everyone knew that a transition was coming, and everyone had their own agenda. Catherine was being watched constantly. Her letters were read, her friendships were monitored, and her every move was scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband or her mother, who was still whispering in her ear on behalf of foreign interests, or even her own servants. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was definitely no fool. She learned to play the court's games very quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. But then, the archaeologists noticed something distinctly odd, an anomaly that piqued their curiosity and hinted at something extraordinary hidden beneath the surface. They discovered a sealed, hidden chamber concealed deep within the structure, untouched by looters and remarkably pristine after centuries of entombment. When the archaeologists finally broke through the ancient seal and carefully lowered themselves inside the hidden chamber, they found a magnificent stone sarcophagus resting in profound silence, undisturbed for over a millennium. The air was thick with the accumulated weight of centuries, heavy with the echoes of forgotten rituals and the secrets of the dead. As they cautiously opened the lid of the sarcophagus, a cloud of red dust billowed upwards like spectral smoke, a brilliant, shocking red that filled the chamber and coated everything within. The interior of the sarcophagus was completely covered in powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide that was highly valued and used ceremonially by the ancient Maya, a substance both sacred and dangerous. And lying peacefully within that crimson cloud of cinnabar, carefully arranged and perfectly preserved, was the complete skeleton of a woman, a person of obvious importance who had been honored with a lavish burial. She had been buried with extraordinary care and obvious reverence, a testament to her high status and the respect she commanded in life. Her bones, fragile yet remarkably intact after centuries of entombment, spoke of a life lived long ago. Her skull was still adorned with an exquisite jade mask, its intricate design hinting at the beauty and power she possessed. And her body was surrounded by a dazzling array of funerary offerings, each one a work of art in itself, including delicate necklaces, ornate diadems, and intricately carved ear spools, all meticulously crafted from jade and shell, precious materials that symbolized wealth and status. It was a carefully constructed gateway to eternity, a conduit to the afterlife, designed to facilitate her transformation and her journey into the divine realm. Her body was discovered inside Temple 13, one of the smaller pyramids located within the heart of Palenque, a seemingly unassuming structure that held within it a secret of immense significance. Yet its close proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the grand and elaborate resting place of Pakel the Great, is highly telling, underscoring the deliberate connection between the two figures and their shared destinies. These temples weren't built randomly or haphazardly. Their positioning was sacred, guided by the principles of astrology, Maya mythology, and the carefully managed dynastic legacy of Palenque, ensuring that each structure reflected the cosmic order and the interconnectedness of all things. Temple 13 rises modestly in comparison to its grand neighbor, lacking the elaborate carvings and inscriptions that adorn the Temple of the Inscriptions. But it hides something even more intimate, something more precious and rare. A sealed crypt, completely untouched by looters, perfectly preserved for over a millennium, a time capsule of Maya beliefs and practices. It was constructed deep within the temple's core, accessible only by a steep and narrow staircase, a descent that would have been both physically challenging and symbolically significant. The descent into her tomb feels almost symbolic, representing a ritual journey downward into the underworld, a passage through the realm of the dead. The chamber itself is stark and simple in its design, made of carefully cut stone blocks, sealed tightly to protect its contents for over 1,300 years. No intricate glyphs or colorful murals cover the walls. No ornate carvings tell her story in explicit detail. But perhaps that very silence is intentional, designed to enhance the mystery and reverence surrounding her burial. When André Breton attempted to classify her as one of their own, she resisted. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said. "But I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico, not the romanticized postcard version, but the living, breathing country she deeply loved. Her work pulsed with powerful symbolism. Skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored the indigenous roots of her homeland while exposing the violence of its past and present. However, Even as her artistic voice grew stronger, her health continued to deteriorate. Multiple surgeries, persistent infections, and chronic pain became her daily reality. Still, she painted through it all, propped up in bed, her torso bound in corsets, her fingers firmly gripping the brush. Frida had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power through paint, through politics, and through her fearless embrace of her authentic self. As the 1940s progressed, Frida Kahlo's body continued to betray her. Her spine was deteriorating. Her right leg was constantly infected. She underwent more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often in rapid succession. At times, she was bedridden for months, confined in body casts or immobilized by traction devices that stretched her bones apart. But still, she painted. Each canvas created during these years became both a form of release and an act of resistance. Her works grew darker and more defiant. She painted with a clarity sharpened by pain, refusing to hide behind metaphor. In the broken column, she presents herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet, her face remains stoic, her gaze unflinching. For Frida, pain was no longer simply a subject. It was her constant companion, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice also grew louder. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can even sleep through the sound of your neighbors yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like some desperate scarecrow. And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next grueling task is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp, feverish nightmare of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you silently. Let's start with drinking. That nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear, like something straight out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if it's not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe are all awaiting you in every single sip. That's why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option, if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning, right? In theory, yes. She charmed military officers, she made friends with scholars, and she developed a reputation for dignity and restraint, which was a stark contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and his open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as just a young consort, she was busy building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was one big problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, just a powerless wife to a man who was completely unfit to rule. So she waited, observed, and planned. She knew that the Russian throne wouldn't just be inherited, it would have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine finally saw her moment, and she seized it with pretty breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was finally the Tsar. But his reign started unraveling almost immediately. In just a few short months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, which was Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine in order to marry his mistress. The court, which was already wary of his erratic behavior, turned ice cold. The army, which was filled with generals who were loyal to Catherine, grumbled in the corridors. Even ordinary Russians, who were devout and patriotic, saw Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, watching all of this unfold, made her move. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'état. Supported by key military officers, including her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Everything about the burial, from the richness of the offerings to the careful arrangement of the remains, screamed royalty, indicating that this was no ordinary individual. Yet, despite the opulence of the burial and the obvious importance of the deceased, no name was inscribed anywhere in the tomb. No glyphs, no markings of any kind identified her, leaving her identity shrouded in mystery. It was, without a doubt, one of the richest and most elaborate female burials ever found in Mesoamerica, a discovery of immense archaeological significance. And yet, it was also a total enigma, a puzzle that archaeologists and historians have been trying to solve ever since. Why was she buried in a shroud of red powder, a substance associated with both life and death? Who was she in life? Was she a powerful queen, a respected priestess, or perhaps even Pakel's wife, a member of the royal family? The researchers, captivated by the mystery and the vibrant color of the tomb, affectionately called her the Red Queen, a nickname that has stuck ever since. But even with the aid of modern forensic techniques and advanced scientific analysis, they couldn't definitively say who she was, only that she had lived around the 7th century AD, during the golden age of Palenque, a period of unprecedented artistic and cultural flourishing. Unlike most Maya tombs, which were often opened and looted over the centuries, hers had remained hidden, completely untouched, and purposefully isolated from the outside world, suggesting a deliberate attempt to protect her remains and preserve her secrets. Her burial was more than just a ceremonial act. It was a deeply spiritual event, imbued with symbolism and meaning. This woman wasn't meant to be remembered solely through words or inscriptions. She was meant to be remembered through ritual, through color, and through the enduring mystery that she left behind, a testament to the enduring power of the past. This was a sacred space not intended for the living to interpret or decipher, but rather a sanctuary for the dead to transform, a place where the Red Queen could undergo her journey into the afterlife undisturbed. At the center of the chamber, her magnificent sarcophagus sits like an altar, carefully crafted from limestone, echoing the grand stone coffin of Pakel next door, reinforcing the connection between the two rulers. While Pakel's lid is famously engraved with elaborate scenes of cosmic rebirth, depicting his descent into the underworld and his subsequent ascent to the heavens, the Red Queen's tomb is more subdued, more understated in its symbolism. The focus is directed inward, towards the body, towards the cinnabar that covers her remains, and towards the ritual of death itself, a process of transformation that transcends the limitations of the mortal world. And yet, despite the relative simplicity of the tomb's design, there are subtle architectural cues that hint at deeper meanings and symbolic significance. The tomb is carefully aligned along an east-to-west axis, a symbolic path mirroring the sun's daily journey from the east, where it rises in the morning, symbolizing life and rebirth, to the west, where it sets in the evening, representing death and the end of the cycle. The chamber is relatively small but intensely powerful, radiating a sense of sacredness and purpose. It feels deliberate, personal, a carefully chosen and constructed space, a sacred enclosure specifically designed for someone who was deeply revered and held in high esteem. Maya temples were not simply architectural structures. They were cosmological tools, meticulously designed bridges between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld, connecting the different realms of existence. To be buried in one of these sacred structures was to be elevated beyond the human realm, to be transformed into a being connected to the divine order of the cosmos. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote impassioned letters, and denounced imperialism and injustice. When her health no longer allowed her to walk, She appeared at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her art. But her health was so precarious that doctors advised her not to attend. So, she did what only Frida would do. She arrived by ambulance, was carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her own work, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and that unyielding fire still burning in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself wearing a steel corset, cradled by the hands of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece bearing the words "Viva la vida," or "Long live life." Even in the face of death, she remained defiant, joyful, and political. Frida Kahlo's last portraits weren't just self-portraits. They were acts of revolution, painted in pain, but always signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo passed away in the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause of death was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She had been ill, yes, but also worn down by pain, by surgeries, by the long battle with her own body. Just days before, she had attended a political protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala. Weak and confined to a wheelchair, she insisted on going, her clenched fist raised in the air. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief but poignant. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let the disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were apparently cleaner if you never removed that protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurricular activities. So, naturally, the church got involved and shut many of them down. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a whole production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray that no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after you. And rainwater collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So, whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating all of your life choices. Next time you sip some tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard. So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, a rash, a broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping them balanced, like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood. The answer? Bloodletting. Petersburg in full regalia was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, completely caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within just a few days. He was taken into custody, and shortly after he was found dead under very mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as hemorrhoidal colic, but unofficially it was murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with absolutely no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle. But her real challenge was just beginning. She had to transform that very bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. Would Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her? Could she possibly hold the empire together without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power that was gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule not as a schemer but as a visionary. And so began her transformation from a very careful conspirator to a reforming empress. One who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have just rested on her laurels. But she didn't. She had something much bigger in mind than simply sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia, and not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and all of the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She truly believed in reason, progress, education, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the people, even if she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while simultaneously defending her autocracy. The most haunting and unforgettable feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't the exquisite jade jewelry or the profound silence of the sealed chamber. It was the pervasive red dust, a thick layer of powdered cinnabar that covered everything within the tomb, creating a surreal and striking visual effect. The sarcophagus itself was coated in the red powder, as were the walls of the chamber, her bones, and even the funerary offerings that surrounded her. It clung to the stone like dried blood, adding an eerie and unsettling atmosphere to the scene. To the ancient Maya, this was no random occurrence or accidental contamination. Cinnabar, carefully made from crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and, paradoxically, dangerous substances in their known world, a substance that held both immense power and inherent risks. Its vibrant red color wasn't just visually striking or aesthetically pleasing. It symbolized blood, the life force that sustained all living things, and rebirth, the cyclical process of renewal that was central to Maya cosmology. It represented the life force that connected the human and divine realms, blurring the boundaries between the mortal and immortal worlds. Red was sacred. It was the color of the sunrise, a symbol of new beginnings, of sacrifice, a necessary act to appease the gods, and of life triumphantly emerging from the clutches of death. And it wasn't just symbolic. It was also deeply spiritual, imbued with transformative power. Covering the deceased in cinnabar was a specific ritual, carefully performed and deeply meaningful, meant to transform the body, preserving it not simply for eternity in a static state, but for the dynamic transition into the afterlife. In Maya belief, death wasn't the end of existence. It was merely a passage, a crucial crossing into another cosmic layer, a journey fraught with challenges and dangers. The Red Queen's eternal home wasn't an afterthought or a random choice. It was a carefully constructed shrine, a sacred space where death became transformation, where the mortal became immortal. Her bones rest in stone, her essence infused within the cinnabar, and her enduring legacy forever etched into the very architecture of the temple itself. A temple that speaks without words, telling us that she mattered, that she was a figure of profound importance in the world of the ancient Maya. To the ancient Maya, death wasn't viewed as the definitive end of existence, a cause for despair and grief. Instead, it was understood as a threshold, a sacred passage into the underworld, a shadowy realm known as Xibalba, a place of trials and tribulations. And for someone of the Red Queen's status and importance, this crossing was not merely a spiritual journey. It was also a political act, a cosmological event, and a deeply ritualized process, all intertwined to ensure her safe passage into the afterlife and her continued influence in the world beyond. Burial rituals were carefully choreographed events, rooted in ancient myths and meant to carefully guide the soul through the treacherous layers of the underworld, helping it to navigate the dangers and challenges that awaited it. Surviving Maya texts and iconography tell us that Xibalba was far from a peaceful or idyllic afterlife. It was a labyrinth of darkness, a realm filled with rivers of blood, daunting trials, and malevolent gods of death who sought to ensnare and torment the souls of the unwary. Only those who were properly buried, ritually prepared, and spiritually equipped could successfully navigate the perils of Xibalba and reach their ultimate destination. The Red Queen was buried wrapped in a shroud of cinnabar, encased in a stone sarcophagus, and surrounded by a dazzling array of precious offerings, all clear signs of an elite burial, a testament to her elevated status and her connection to the divine. Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was mourned by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, calling her the greatest love of his life, even though his betrayals had nearly broken her. But in the years that followed her death, something extraordinary occurred. Frida Kahlo refused to fade away. Initially, her name was whispered only in art circles. Her works were difficult to categorize, too political for the surrealists and too surreal for the traditionalists. But slowly, her image, her story, and her unwavering defiance began to resonate. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's voice grew louder. She was no longer just a painter. She was a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, with its iconic unibrow, piercing gaze, and flowers in her hair, became instantly recognizable. Her home became a museum. Her diary became a sacred text, and her paintings now hang in the world's most renowned museums. Frida Kahlo had lived much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped forward and commanded the spotlight. She didn't just leave behind paintings. She left behind a mirror and dared us all to look, not with pity or fear, but with a burning passion for truth. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is ubiquitous, printed on t-shirts, painted on murals, transformed into dolls, memes, posters, and countless other icons. Her signature unibrow, her flower-crowned hair, and her direct, unwavering gaze are all instantly recognizable. But what makes her legacy so powerful isn't simply that people recognize her face, but that they connect with the truth behind it. Frida didn't strive for flawlessness. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1. Baby, feeling sad or anxious. That's clearly an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge, or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics are centuries away. Germ theory hasn't been invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit and the leech gets promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. She invited Diderot to her court, and even purchased his entire library just to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, which was a very ambitious project that was intended to rewrite the entire legal code of Russia. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, was a political manifesto in disguise, one that spoke of equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was definitely radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to somehow survive the realities of Russia, which was a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land that was ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were, beneath them. Catherine knew this very well. While she advocated for reform, she moved extremely carefully. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded access to secular education, and built schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs in order to keep them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act, a philosopher queen in public and a very practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but always calculated. In many ways, Catherine wasn't really trying to make Russia European. She was just trying to make Russia modern on her own terms. And that meant reform, yes, but always with an iron hand in a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content with just reforming Russia from within. She wanted to expand it outward in order to make it an empire that was worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down all of the walls. And so the Red Queen, whoever she was in life, was being meticulously prepared not just for burial in the earth, but for deification, a process of transformation that would elevate her to a divine status. But there's another, more complex layer to this ancient practice, a layer of danger and inherent risk that underscores the Maya's sophisticated understanding of the world around them. Cinnabar is, in fact, toxic. Repeated or prolonged exposure to it can lead to mercury poisoning, a debilitating condition characterized by tremors, hallucinations, and even death. The Maya may not have fully understood the complex chemistry involved, but they intuitively sensed its potency, its volatile nature, and its inherent dangers. It was powerful, a substance to be treated with respect and caution. To bathe the corpse of the Red Queen in it was, in essence, to declare that this person was no ordinary mortal, that they possessed a unique connection to the divine realm. In Palenque, it's worth noting, very few individuals were buried with such lavish use of cinnabar, a practice reserved for the most elite and powerful members of society. Pacal the Great, the mighty king whose grand pyramid dominates the entire site, was one notable exception. His body, like hers, was also saturated in the red powder, indicating his elevated status and his close relationship with the gods. That single, compelling detail, the shared use of cinnabar, immediately fueled intense speculation among archaeologists. Was the Red Queen Pacal's wife, his mother, or perhaps someone of equal divine status, a figure of immense importance in her own right? Adding to the mystery, her skull had been carefully placed on a layer of jaguar skin, another potent sacred symbol in Maya culture, representing power, strength, and the connection to the spirit world. But there's more to her burial than simply lavish offerings. The presence of bone needles and sharp obsidian blades in her tomb hint at the performance of auto-sacrifice rituals, practices that were common in Maya culture and believed to strengthen the connection between the mortal and spiritual realms. These may have been symbolic tools representing rites that she had performed during her life or that were reenacted at the time of her burial to empower her spirit and prepare her for her journey. Her elaborate funerary mask, carefully assembled from hundreds of tiny jade tiles, was not simply a decorative piece. It may have served as a spiritual vessel, preserving her face and her individual identity as she journeyed into the afterlife, ensuring that she would be recognized by the gods and granted safe passage through their realm. In Maya belief, the face was considered a mirror of the soul, reflecting one's inner essence and allowing them to be identified in the world beyond. The ceramic vessels that surrounded her may have once held offerings of chocolate, maize, water, or even pulque, a fermented beverage, all intended to nourish her spirit and provide her with sustenance in the next world, helping her to endure the long and arduous journey. Other items, such as stingray spines or shell trumpets, could have represented spiritual tools, used to call upon the gods, send messages to the spirit world, or serve as tokens of ritual communication, facilitating her interaction with the divine beings who govern the afterlife. Burial, therefore, wasn't simply a final goodbye, a farewell to the deceased. It was a profound transformation, a ritualized process that marked the beginning of a new stage of existence. The Maya believed in cycles, in the constant renewal of. It's important to remember that in the ancient Mayan civilization, women weren't silent bystanders. They presided over rituals, governed cities, and played vital roles in shaping dynasties. She didn't fit neatly into any predefined categories. She wasn't conventional, and she had no desire to be. In a world that constantly demands perfection, she offered us something real, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and contradictory realness. She celebrated the qualities that made her unique. Her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and she transformed them into art that transcended borders and defied the passage of time. She has become more than just an artist. She's a global symbol of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer communities, she's a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time that demanded silence. For women, she's a powerful reminder that strength doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she's living proof that pain can fuel the brush, not hinder it. And for Mexico, she's a cherished daughter, fierce, folkloric, and forever woven into the fabric of the nation's soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, are now among the most revered in the world. Works like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column aren't just viewed. They're deeply felt by anyone who has ever experienced suffering and has sought to transform that suffering into something sacred. She inhabited the margins and transformed them into center stage. She embraced contradiction. A communist who adorned herself with gold. A woman betrayed who dared to love again. A body in pieces with an unbreakable spirit. And through it all, she painted, not just with color, but with unwavering conviction. Frida Kahlo never sought to become a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions of others who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now, when we see her face, we see courage, we see color, we see resistance. We see Frida not gone, but immortal. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it's rye season, there's a bonus, ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. Which, if you remember from Chapter 3, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but they're loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because frankly it's either that or chew your boot leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, salt, if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard. It's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Get caught poaching a rabbit? You could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right. Your dinner could get you hanged. So, as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember every bite is a risk. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish. Tests you. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed because God is watching. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just to defend her crown, but to reshape the entire map of Europe. One of her most significant campaigns was definitely against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, which were fought in waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, weren't just about territory, they were also about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians who were living under Muslim rule, and as the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured key regions, including Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and access to warm water ports, something that Russian Tsars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just military victories, they were also symbolic. With each conquest, Catherine sent a very clear message. Russia was no longer the distant, backward cousin of Europe, it was now a continental force. She also turned her gaze westward. In a series of deals and diplomatic maneuvers, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, carving up the struggling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth along with Austria and Prussia. By the end of the Third Partition in 1795, Poland was completely erased from the map, and Russia claimed vast new lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies, she also colonized with ideas. New cities were built, trade routes were expanded, German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire quickly became a mosaic, from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched shores of the Black Sea. And through it all, Catherine remained the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and personally overseeing the shape of her expanding empire. Critics would often accuse her of being power-hungry and even imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't just ambition, it was destiny. Around her, carefully arranged, were bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines, hinting at complex rituals performed either during her life or in her honor at the time of her death. Every single element of her burial, from the choice of materials to the arrangement of the objects, told a story without words, a silent narrative of power cloaked in secrecy. A woman prepared to cross into the underworld, not in silence or obscurity, but in a grand and elaborate ceremony, drenched in the color of sacrifice, a powerful symbol of her transition into the divine realm. While kings like Pakel have historically dominated the narratives, the Red Queen's rediscovery is a potent reminder that power wasn't solely a male domain. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her lasting impact goes far beyond the material riches she was buried with. It's the ongoing dialogue she has sparked among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Each jade bead, each layer of cinnabar, every intentional architectural detail within her temple speaks volumes. This woman was significant, and perhaps the most compelling aspect of her story is not what we currently know, but rather what remains unknown. The Red Queen teaches us that history isn't simply a fixed compilation of facts. It's a dynamic puzzle, a shared human aspiration to connect with the past. In this respect, her legacy continues to unfold. She rests enveloped in red, a color symbolizing life and sacrifice, blood and rebirth. Her face, once concealed behind a jade mask, now gazes back at us through the lenses of science, art, and wonder. She remains nameless, yet far from voiceless, enshrouded in mystery but certainly not forgotten. The Red Queen may have ruled a physical kingdom during her lifetime, but in death, she reigns over something far grander, our collective imagination. Her tomb was secured in stone. Her story was initially written in silence, and yet, somehow she still manages to speak. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Massachusetts. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just a part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can even read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream? Double sin. And yes, a great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by ideas, but by borders. She didn't just want to rule Russia, She wanted to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by its enemies, respected by its peers, and absolutely loyal to her alone. For all of her brilliance and power, Catherine the Great was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors. And no, not all of it was whispered in libraries. Catherine's private life became one of the most talked about aspects of her reign. She had lovers, and not just one or two, but a very carefully curated parade of them. Many decades younger, often handsome, and sometimes politically influential. She definitely didn't hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. And if they didn't, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you and a promotion. Among the most important of these lovers was Grigory Potemkin, a man who was as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred the lines between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians even believe that they may have actually married in secret. Together, they shaped military campaigns, colonization projects, and the transformation of southern Russia. Potemkin wasn't just a lover, he was her co-ruler in many ways. Still, Europe just couldn't look past the scandal. Gossip swirled. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, and even unhinged. And after her death, the rumors only got worse. The most infamous being the completely false and grotesque tale involving a horse, which was spread by her enemies to smear her legacy. But why all of the obsession? The simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically. And in a world where female rulers were expected to be either saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play either role. She lived, loved, and ruled on her own terms, and that made her very dangerous. Ironically, while her critics painted her as immoral, Catherine herself was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed that pleasure was just a natural part of life, and that personal relationships didn't have to threaten public responsibility. She separated emotion from governance, which is a feat that very few male rulers have ever managed. In reality, her liaisons were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful, and when they ceased to be, she let them go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life didn't weaken her rule, it was just part of her strategy. A blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. For all of her charisma and control, Catherine's reign was definitely not without peril. And in 1773, that peril came in the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelian Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. Pugachev claimed to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's dead husband. According to him, he had survived the coup, and he had now returned in order to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. It was absurd. Peter had been long gone, but to Russia's oppressed and exhausted lower classes, the claim didn't really need to be true, it just needed to offer them some hope. Pugachev promised liberation and end to serfdom lower,